Feeling so stuck in my head that I forget just about everything my therapist said. Maybe I'm self-helpless.
Hey everyone, welcome to Self-Helpless, where science, spirituality, and sustainability are brunch buddies. I'm Delanie Fischer, and details about today's topic can be found in the episode description. Returning listeners, if an episode of Self-Helpless has supported you in some way, a quick 5-star rating or review, if you haven't left one already, honestly keeps this indie podcast alive amidst the big old budget behemoths out there. So thank you for feeding the algorithm a little treat for me. Ad-free episodes are now on Patreon at patreon.com/selfhelpless, and info about some free goodies will be shared in the outro. Okay, it's podcast time. Dr. Warsh, thank you so much for being here. This is a very sensitive topic. There is a lot of fear around talking about this. There's a lot of, division. And so I really appreciate your balanced approach to it.
Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I know. I mean, vaccines are so divisive and so, controversial, but I don't think that it should be. And I never thought I'd be talking about vaccines, but here we are. And I think it's an important thing that we should be able to talk about. We should be able to have the discussion, and we don't have to agree on every single thing all the time, but we should be able to at least talk about it. And I try to, express the things that I hear in the office and from parents.
Absolutely. So you're a doctor, obviously. How much training or education did you get on vaccines throughout your formal conventional education?
I mean, the reality when you look back is you get very little. So
Okay.
you don't even think about it really, I guess. It's really the thing. Like you get taught,
Yeah.
here are the vaccines that we offer. Here are the horrible diseases that we used to have. Here's how much better things are than they used to be. Um, this is great. Let's go do it. And here's your schedule. Good luck. And that's kind of the big topics that you learn. Obviously, you talk about and learn about the schedule and when to
Mm.
give things and what the diseases are, but it's not a lot of discussion around vaccines, vaccine safety, what goes in the vaccines, what are the ingredients. I mean, none of that is really discussed, or it's very glossed over, certainly. And I think it's really actually, as you look back, like really interesting that we don't get taught a lot of this stuff when I think we should have
Right.
been. You really have to learn it yourself.
What made you want to look into this more? If, you don't get that much training and then obviously you can become a doctor and you can treat patients, what made you wanna do some more digging into it?
I think it was the patience. So for
Yeah.
me, I met my wife during residency training. She's very holistic minded, and it opened up my eyes to a different world. And that kind of led me to learning more about integrative medicine and functional medicine, and did some training in that. And so I started practicing that way. And pretty quickly I became, more of an integrative doctor, and people were seeking me out for that. Just because I was more
Mm.
open to that world, I guess. And once you get into the world of integrative anything, people have a lot of questions about vaccines, and obviously I didn't know that at the time, but you
Oh,
start getting
interesting.
more and more questions, and more individuals who are hesitant about vaccines, who have questions about them. Certainly online, I got more and more questions about vaccines, and so I had to learn more. Like I really had to. I didn't know the answer to some of the questions I was getting, and you really didn't couldn't find much online, other than if you're just looking at the very like specific CDC perspective. But a lot of parents had questions that were maybe above and beyond that, or other things, and so I had to start researching. And I realized over the last, I would say, decade, that the conversation was so censored. It was impossible to have it. If anybody was asking questions, their platforms would just be taken away. And
Right.
so I really didn't talk about it that much, other than inside the office. But COVID really pushed me, and I think a lot of people, to be frustrated with the whole paradigm around vaccines, and really the lack of ability to have a discussion. And so that pushed me to write a book, between a shot and a hard place. And so that's what I did. I did the research for the book, and really, when you do the research, you realize what information we do have and what information we don't have, and where some of these questions are coming from, and where some things are reasonable and less reasonable. But ultimately, it was that gradual push to become more educated so I can discuss it that was really the catalyst for me.
First of all, I think it's amazing that you are willing to admit that when your patients had questions, you didn't have all the answers, that you had to go do some further research. Most of us can maybe think about an experience with a doctor where you ask a question and they seem to know everything about everything, right? Which is
Yeah, and
which is impossible.
it's impossible, but certainly with vaccines, I mean, there were a lot of good questions I was getting on ingredients, or concerns about aluminum, or concerns about too many vaccines. And it's really very quick when you look at the research to understand that there's a lot that we just don't know anyways. I mean, we still don't know a lot. There's a lot of things that I still, even after doing all the research, would say that I think we need a lot more research on. And
Okay.
we make definitive statements that are not that definitive. But ultimately, yeah, the questions push you, and also the stories that you hear from parents, the concerns, the reactions that they feel like they've had, and feel like they've been dismissed. And it made me really frustrated as a doctor and as a parent, because I don't feel like these parents should be disregarded. Like, I'm not saying that people shouldn't get vaccines. I'm just saying every medical product has a potential for reactions. We know this for everything else, and it seems like for vaccines, that word is magical and you can't talk about it. And if you have a reaction, then it's just dismissed, or it's just coincidence. And you're like, okay, but like, how many coincidences could there possibly be? Why couldn't there be a reaction sometimes? It doesn't mean that there can't be benefits from the thing. But
Right.
also, if you can't talk about reactions, then how can you make them better or safer? Or how can we figure out who are the kids that maybe should get vaccines? Like, not every kid should always get every single medication that's out there. Like, there are certainly genetics or situations where your personal situation might be not the one where the thing is beneficial. So I think we need to have
Right.
conversations in that way. And that's the way we approach everything else. But with the vaccines, it's like a very different world. Or if you even ask the question, you're a crazy anti-vaxxer woo-woo person. And
Right.
and all these parents who are very reasonable, I think, were kind of shunned or kicked out of their office. Like, for example, there was one family, well, a few families with similar situations, but one had a older kid that's fully vaccinated, normal schedule, never really thought anything about vaccines. Had a younger kid who got their 2-month vaccines, had a very serious reaction that put them in the hospital. And everyone said, "Oh, it's just probably coincidence. We don't necessarily think it's from the vaccines. You can do more." And so around 4 months, that parents were hesitant, but everyone was like, "No, no, it was just coincidence. So you should still get your kids their next vaccines." And they did, and the kid had the exact same negative reaction again within a day and back in the hospital.
Oh,
And
wow.
even that was not enough to convince anybody that it was a vaccine reaction. Everybody said, "Well, no, it could just be coincidence." And when the 6-month vaccines came up, the parents were like, "You know what, this kid's had bad reactions. Like, I'm very concerned. I don't think that we should do vaccines right now. We should wait. Maybe we'll do it later." And the doctors basically said, like, "No, we need you to do it on schedule. If you don't do it on schedule, we can't have you in our office." And they kicked them out. And
Oh.
just situations like that just blow my mind, as a pediatrician when I hear that story, because eh, that person's not an anti-vaxxer. Like, I don't know what that means, but it's
Right.
like this person literally has a child that's fully vaccinated on schedule, did it even after reactions, had 2 reactions, and still nobody's willing to say maybe it could be from the vaccines, maybe this is the kid that we shouldn't do them for, or maybe they should go slower or push it back. Like, that's
Yeah.
absurd to me. You give a kid amoxicillin and they have a little bit of a rash, you're like, never take amoxicillin again. And a kid has a reaction
Mm.
like this, and you're like, "Yeah, it's probably not from the vaccines." It's like, well, that's such a double standard
Right.
that just doesn't make sense. It's not that you have to be against vaccines to be like, well, maybe this is the kid that's allergic to some component or having a reaction. Like, why couldn't that be possible?
Right, and from the doctor's perspective, are they kicking a patient out of their practice because they now see them as a liability or something because they're not getting their kids vaccinated on schedule? What is the thought process of removing somebody from their care?
And there are many different reasons, but I
Okay.
think that this is a specific situation. But I would say in general, there are a lot of doctors that just, most doctors really, really believe in vaccines, and they feel like if you don't want to get vaccines, then you're not the right fit for them. You don't believe in science, or you don't believe in protecting kids, or
Mhm.
they want have an office where everybody's fully vaccinated, so that there's that cocooning for the other kids that are there. Or they just don't want to deal with the liability of the fact that you might not have a vaccine and have a reaction, and I'm not like, there are many reasons why, or they just don't want to. I mean, some people
Yeah.
just don't want to, and ultimately you're allowed to do that. But I don't think that's right personally. I think we're supposed to treat everybody, and you're not supposed to discriminate based on their personal choices. But
Right.
some people do. But also on the flip side, I mean, I think if you do want to go slow or you don't want to do vaccines, you probably don't want to go to an office where they want to force you. So I think ultimately, it's probably not the right office for you anyways.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point what you said about the ingredients in a vaccine. Why can't somebody be allergic to a vaccine? I mean, they ask you if you have a latex allergy, they ask you all these different things.
I mean, why wouldn't it be possible? You could be allergic to like anything. People are allergic to all sorts of weird things. So I mean,
Right.
sensitive or allergic, there are dozens of ingredients in most vaccines. There are
Right.
probably hundreds of ingredients in total across vaccines. So why wouldn't some people have sensitivity to some of those ingredients being injected into them? Like, and then they say,
Right.
"Oh, well, it's just a very small amount." But then somebody could walk by a peanut and be super sensitive to peanuts and whiff a
Right.
peanut and just like
Right.
a particle of it and have an anaphylactic reaction. So again, I go back to, it's such a double standard. It's not common sense. Like, that doesn't mean people shouldn't get vaccines, but we should be able to acknowledge that some people probably have reactions to these things. Some people have horrible reactions to a vaccine. And we should be sitting here not saying that doesn't happen. We should be saying,
Right.
okay, who does it happen to and why? And how do we minimize that risk? How do we figure out who those kids are? Is there, genetic testing we could do? Are there other things that maybe in the future that we could do to sort of figure out beforehand or certainly after who are the kids that are most susceptible? Maybe those are the kids that don't get vaccines, or maybe those are the kids that go on a slow schedule or whatever. I don't know what the answer is,
Mm, mm.
but I know the answer is not to just say that vaccines are safe and effective always. That's not reality. That's not science. That's not fair to the kids who have serious reactions that we just ignore.
So, what are the main things that we do know about vaccines based on the science and evidence that we have? And what are the things that we still don't know about them, whether it's lack of studies or information, anything along those lines?
Yeah, I think working backwards, I would say the things that we know the least about vaccines, in my opinion, would be the long-term complications of them.
Mm.
So what kind of risk they pose cumulatively when you're doing the whole schedule? What's the long-term complications in terms of autoimmune conditions, asthma, allergies, autism, all these things I think we don't have a wonderful understanding of. Even though we say we do, I really think that we just don't have a strong understanding of those long-term risks because most of the studies are done short-term. And then the rest of the research that we have is epidemiological research, which is not the strongest type of research. And we don't have any long term vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies. We don't really look at most of these issues in general in the research. Most of the research is done before a vaccine hits the market. So those are usually short
Oh,
term studies, right? And so
right.
that's done by the company. So I don't think we have as strong a body of literature as people would think that we have in terms of long-term risks. But what we do have, in terms of your question, I think we have a very good understanding of the diseases. I think we have a very good understanding of how the vaccines work and how effective they can be. I think we have a good understanding of the short-term risks in terms of getting a fever and not feeling good and rashes and those kinds of things. But again, I think that the long-term complications are what we haven't really studied that much
Yeah.
because that's a hard thing to study, and that's not how we study vaccines in general. If you think about how a vaccine is studied, it's done by the company most of the time. Before the vaccine hits the market, they're studying it for a few months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year or two if you're lucky. They're generally studying that vaccine against maybe another vaccine, but not in combination with the whole schedule. And they're certainly not following kids for 5 or 10 years to look at cancer rates or autoimmune conditions or other things down the line. So we're just left with epidemiologic studies, and we do certainly have some of those, but we definitely don't have them when they're comparing vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids, and we don't have, I would say, a ton of those, and even those are still very extremely biased, where you see
Mm.
things that are very very pro-vaccine done by pro-vaccine researchers and very very anti-vax for people that are pretty against vaccines, and so that's why I think that we're at a point where we need the best kind of studies, which is following kids forward, to really have a good understanding of potential complications. I'm not saying that they're there, but
Right.
I'm saying that I don't think we've really explored that like like we're told that we have.
I'm actually shocked to learn that we don't have any long-term studies about vaccinated people and versus unvaccinated people. I
That
understand
was
kind
I.
of. Yeah, that is actually incredibly shocking, and I mean, wouldn't it be simple enough to at least do a comparative study
Of course it
now,
would.
right? So why aren't we doing that and trying to kind of settle this once and for all?
Right, I mean, that's the question, right? I mean, that it's
That
such
is
a crazy
weird.
thing because because I thought that there were tons of those, right? I thought there were tons of vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies because we're told that that's true. But usually, when you're looking at those kinds of studies, it's like, oh, MMR versus no MMR in the setting of getting your other vaccines. So it's not a fully unvaccinated kid. There's certainly no prospective studies. There are some epidemiologic studies with a lot of limitations, usually very specific, looking at some of the vaccines. There are many vaccines that have just hit the market in the last couple of years. So no, it hasn't been done. And your question is why hasn't it been done? I don't know. I mean that's crazy to me. Like
Right.
you could take the databases and go and look and compare vaccinated versus unvaccinated kids. It wouldn't be that hard. But that really hasn't been done. And so that leads me to say, well, was it done and then people didn't find what they wanted to find, and so they just didn't publish the study, or did they really just not look? That's just not how the studies have been done, especially when you're talking about autism. And I
Right.
think that's the big question in people's minds these days. And we're told, oh, so defend like, oh, it's been studied, it's debunked. We've done all these studies, and they've never done it before. They've never done fully vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies in kids, and they've never studied all the vaccines. They've mostly studied MMR and thimerosal, and that's it. And thimerosal is not even in vaccines anymore. So when you say things like it's been debunked. Like that, when you look at the research, you're like, no, it hasn't. Like, it's not to say that vaccines do cause autism. The answer is we don't know. We haven't studied it appropriately. We've never done the right kind of research,
Yeah.
and that is extremely clear when you look at it. The reason why they say that vaccines don't cause autism is because nothing's ever proven that it does. But you have to study it first.
Right. I mean,
So
can't we at least say, look, you're not, I'm not pro-vaccine, we're not anti-vaccine, but at the very least, this is inconclusive. Like,
correct.
can it just be
That's
very
the correct
neutral?
answer.
Right.
That is the correct answer. The correct way to say something, if you want to be honest, is there's nothing or very little that's shown that there is a relationship here, but we haven't studied it, so it's inconclusive, or we haven't studied it, so we're not really sure. Like that's the honest answer. It's not to say that they have, and that's where I think it's the nuance is really important. But the definitive nature of the statements of vaccines don't cause autism or vaccines don't cause X is really wrong, because we shouldn't be so conclusive on that. We should say, well, we actually need to go get more research and studies on this to see what we do actually find.
Right.
And that's what I think we need, and that's what I'm pushing for. I want those studies to happen. It's not anti-science. I want more science. I want to actually see. I don't know what we're going to find, but what I do know is that thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of parents that have the same story, and that is anecdotal. But when a parent says, I'm not anti-vaccine. I've gotten a bunch of vaccines. My kids have gotten a vaccine. My 2-year-old was totally healthy and developing normally, air quotes, whatever that means. And they were talking and going to the bathroom and potty trained and all these things one day. And then they went in and got a bunch of vaccines. And the next day, everything changed and they had a high fever and they were miserable and they lost their communication. Those kinds of stories. When you hear that over and over and over again, you have to say, well, that's some data. We should explore that. And maybe it's not all crazy, right? I don't know. I
Right.
don't know. Sometimes you can just have correlation. Sometimes something can just be coincidence, but thousands and thousands of coincidences are data, and that's what shapes research. I just don't think we should ignore that. That's all. I just don't think that there's nothing there, or we say, oh, it's been proven. Like I don't think that with that much of a concern around the topic that we could say anywhere near conclusion that we know that these things are not associated. I think that's what the research is for. So we can say, look, we have these studies, or we have these stories, we have these concerns, and we need to get the best kind of research. And the way to do that is to follow kids forward, to do a prospective trial. It could be done. It's never been done.
And you'd think that people on all ends of the spectrum would want more evidence, especially if they think they're right. I would assume that they would want more evidence to just say, "See, I told you." But I would love your thoughts on. Okay, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor, but isn't there an inherent conflict of interest if the company is the one doing the study or in charge of the study? How are vaccines tested, and how can the public even trust that the results haven't been tampered with, or they've been ethically carried out?
Yeah, we can't. I mean, that's just the question.
Right.
You
Right.
the companies are the ones doing the trials before something hits the market. That's how it works. I mean, they're the ones that have the money, the financial gain from it, so they're the ones doing the research. But yeah, they could obviously fudge the data. They could obviously tamper with things. I mean, they're not supposed to. Hopefully, they're not. But they have every incentive to not show things that might not be in their benefit, to kind of hide things, to set up the trials in a way to make it most likely to be beneficial, to report things in a way that makes the product look better. I mean, of course they're going to do that. That's what they always do. So that's a big problem with the system. I mean, the biggest issue with the system overall is that you can't sue them, right? So with the
Mm.
1986 Liability Act, you can't really sue a vaccine manufacturer for a problem. If you do have an issue with a vaccine, you can theoretically sue the government, but you can't sue a vaccine manufacturer. So they don't have liability from vaccines. So they have every incentive to get something on the market and to not necessarily worry about safety. Obviously, they don't want to put some product out there that's just killing everybody,
Right.
but they don't necessarily have the impetus like they do with other products to make sure that it's safe. Like a lot of medications are studied for 5, 10 plus years because they want to make sure there isn't some sort of long-term complication. They don't have to do that with vaccines because if something does pop up later, they're not liable. So
What?
they have no reason to make them better. They have no reason to improve them. And so that again goes back to this just terrible incentive structure that we've set up in this country and in the world around vaccines, where it's just different than every other product. And so again, it's like people talk about conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just we've set up the system in a way where if you were a company, what would you do to try to make money? you want to minimize showing any risk. You'd want to maximize showing the benefit. You would set this everything up in the best way possible, and you wouldn't care that much about safety because it doesn't matter because you can't be sued. So that's how we've set it up for vaccines, and it's not how any other product is done in America. So it's a problem, and when you don't have the pushback and you don't have the oversight, then you run into the situation where we are now, where there's every incentive for a vaccine manufacturer to get a vaccine onto the market. And like your question asks, how do we know they're doing things right? We don't know. We don't know. You just
Right.
the stuff is presented from the company to the boards that kind of look things over and that approve things, and they look at that data and they decide whether they think it's reasonable or not, safe or not, and you have to hope that they've given you real data, but you're not accessing the raw data. You're not looking at it yourself. You don't know what they haven't shown you. So maybe they did a trial that had a really bad outcome and they just don't show it, right? Like these are all things that are
Mm.
possible. They're supposed to show everything. They're supposed to be honest, but how do we know that they're being honest? We don't know.
What kind of ingredients are in vaccines that maybe some people would be surprised to learn about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a long list of ingredients in most vaccines, but I think
Yeah.
the biggest concern is generally on the metals, so like aluminum. There used to be mercury in vaccines, thimerosal, not anymore. There are preservatives and additives and adjuvants. Fetal tissue is one of the big concerns that some people have from an ethical standpoint. So some of them are
Oh,
grown in fetal tissue, aborted fetal tissue. So those are just some of the ingredients. And there are a lot of different things you can look and pull it up and see the different
yeah.
ingredients, but I think the big concern would be the metals at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting you said aluminum. I mean, they tell you not to even wear aluminum deodorant, and here we are getting injections of aluminum at what, a couple days old?
Yeah, well, 1 day
That's
old, right? So there's
1 day
aluminum
old.
in hepatitis B, and so I guess the conventional discussion would be around, well, it's a really, really small amount, and we eat a lot more and we're exposed to a lot more, and aluminum is in our environment, so
Okay.
therefore in the vaccine we shouldn't be worried about the aluminum because it's such a small amount. And maybe that's true, but I personally don't think that's a great explanation. I think that again, yes, that might be true for most people, and maybe for some people even a little bit of aluminum is too much for them. So I think that's one
Mm,
factor. I think that when we're getting aluminum in general, it's through ingestion mostly. So your body has evolved to ingest chemicals and toxins and metals, and so it's a little bit different of a pathway than injecting it, which bypasses the normal immune cells. And also with a vaccine, there's just a bunch of other things in there, so maybe they interact in a way that's different than ingesting something. So again, I just don't know that that's necessarily a problem, but the answer to me of, well, it's just a small amount, just doesn't really work in my mind, is saying like that's a definitive answer. And not to mention, we're doing more and more vaccines with more and more aluminum. So what is the cumulative effect of doing more? So
right.
to me, again, is going back, like these are all from a parent reasonable questions that we don't have a lot of answers to, because most of the answers are, it's just a small amount, it's safe, it's okay. And I don't think that's unfair as a parent to say, well, I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm a little bit concerned about injecting aluminum into my 1 day old baby.
Mm,
Um, that's not an unreasonable concern. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't. It just means, well, if a lot of people have that concern, we should be addressing it. We should be talking about it. We should be studying it more. We shouldn't be ignoring it, which I feel like a lot of parents feel like their safety concerns are just ignored.
yeah.
And I think if we want to build back trust and build back faith in that system and in vaccines, we have to be discussing these things more and studying them more. But that's not what's happening, and we're seeing the hesitancy skyrocket. And I think that's why. I mean, we have the highest rates of unvaccinated kids we've ever had, the
Oh,
highest rates of
wow.
exemptions we've ever had. The majority of parents are hesitant now. More than 50% on most studies now say that they're not necessarily planning to follow the regular schedule. They want to go
Oh,
slow. They don't necessarily want to do any vaccines. Like that, those numbers are skyrocketing compared to what they used to be, which is a very small percentage. So
right.
um, the hesitancy is there, and medicine's not addressing it, which I think is a big fault of what's going on right now, because there's this pushback and digging our heels in the sand and saying, "Oh no, no, vaccines are great. They're the best thing ever. What are you talking about? You guys are all crazy." And with information and the internet and social media, the stories of concern are exploding, and I think the concern from regular average parents is growing. And unless those are addressed, I think you're going to see more and more hesitancy in the near future.
Fighting about it. It doesn't make the problem go away. If everybody kind of put their egos aside on all ends of this spectrum, the hesitancy and distrust alone should be worth it to figure this out. I didn't realize the numbers are going up of
Oh, they're skyrocketing. It
yeah.
was like just in general, there was a huge Pew survey of like, I don't know, I think 400,000 or 500,000 people, and they were looking at the like kind of respect and care for hospitals and healthcare and workers, and it was like 70% before the pandemic, and now it's like 40% of people that actually like respect or trust the medical system, and like, that's really low. It's
Yeah.
really low. You have things like CDC recommendations for the COVID vaccine, and even last year it was like 25% of adults or something got it, and 5 or 10% of kids. And it's like, well, when you have most people not following the CDC's guidelines, we have a problem.
Mm.
And you have to say, well, do people not trust it anymore, or the or are the guidelines wrong? And if the guidelines are wrong, why are they not listening to what people want? Or if the guidelines are correct, well, why are so many people not listening to what's being recommended? I mean, we just have this huge problem right now of trust and respect. And like you said earlier, the way to gain that back is to do studies, right? And not to push back and say we don't need them. No, you should do more research and studies and see what you see. And obviously, everything takes time and it takes money. We can't do everything. We can't answer every question, but you can start to acknowledge that people have these concerns and start to set up more and more trials around these types of questions. And the more that you do, if you don't find a problem, if you do a prospective trial and for 10 years, you're like, look, after 10 years, kids that are unvaccinated have the exact same rates of autism as kids that are vaccinated. That's the kind of research that's going to make people confident to do vaccines and say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that's what I was looking for. I can feel a little bit more confident with this. Or we might find things that we are surprised with, and then we can say why. Like, what if we find that hepatitis B vaccine at 1 day of life increases your risk of asthma by 10 times?
Mm.
Wouldn't you want to know that? Like, wouldn't a
Right.
doctor? No doctor wants to harm kids. We're trying to do things to prevent infection, and why, if we were to study it and we found something, wouldn't we want to be like, okay, well, why? Like, what ingredient in there? What's going on? Can we change it? Can we put a different ingredient? Doesn't mean we don't vaccinate anymore, but maybe there are things we could do to decrease the risks of long-term complications or even short-term complications. Like, that's what we should always be doing. We should always be trying to minimize the chance of getting a disease, but also minimize your chance of a risk or a side effect from any sort of intervention that we do. And it just doesn't seem like we focus very frequently or almost at all these days on the risks from vaccines. It's all about the benefits, and that
Mm.
is not sitting well with most people. I think that's like, people just don't accept the, oh, it's just safe, just do it because I said so. Like, they're not doing things just because
Right.
doctors say so anymore.
So you mentioned autism, asthma. Are there any other concerns people are bringing forward? Is there a potential correlation with SIDS or allergies or, anything like that? What are people talking about that they're worried about?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, everything, right? Because everything's
Okay.
skyrocketing in kids. So chronic disease in children is skyrocketing. Like 50% of kids have a chronic disease now. So we're talking about autoimmune disease, cancer, autism, ADHD, neurodevelopmental concerns, allergies, asthma. Everything is skyrocketing over the last few years, and it's obviously not just because of vaccines. But I think that the question in the average parent's mind, or certainly in the medical world too, is like, why? Why are all these things skyrocketing runs? Why do we have skyrocketing rates of cancer? Like, what's going on? And no doubt there are many factors that are involved in that. Of course there are. It's there's no way that it's just vaccines that are causing these things. Of course that's not true. But
Yeah.
the question of how vaccines, if at all, are related to these things is not unreasonable, because a vaccine is literally meant to stimulate your immune system to create a response. And why couldn't that go in a negative direction or cause a negative or some sort of reaction that you're not intending in your immune system in your body down the road? Other medications can do that. So
Yeah.
I think that's a reasonable concern to say, look, in the list of things that we're looking at for possible concerns for why some of these things are skyrocketing, shouldn't that also be on the list? It should. We have more and more vaccines. We're adding more all the time, and it should be something that we think about or discuss. Maybe there's a chemical in there. Maybe the way that we're doing it, I don't know. Maybe it has nothing to do with any of it. I don't know. But
Right.
it's not an unreasonable thing to ask when in that setting.
I mean, if we're willing to start looking around at our environment, like, okay, what's in our food, what's in our air, what's in our water supply, it makes sense that we can also look into what we're injecting into our bodies, right?
Right,
I mean,
and that's all I'm saying. Like, why you just you get in this mindset, I think, as a doctor or even just an average person, as like, oh, vaccines are the best thing ever. Like, why are we questioning them? Anyone that talks about it is woo or crazy. And if you step back and you just say exactly what you said, like, what? Why wouldn't we want to examine that? Like, when
right.
we were growing up, there were just a few, and now there are a lot, and we're injecting them into our kids, and we're injecting them into little babies, especially like some of them are giving at 1 day old. why couldn't that have a negative effect sometimes? Like, yes, it could have a positive effect. Yes, it could do a lot of good things, but we need to figure out both things so we can kind of weigh that moving forward. Because if it does turn out that they're negatively affecting kids and some of these things are related, like maybe there are other ways we could do vaccines. Like with some of them, we have that oral. Maybe you could rub it on your skin. Maybe you could do a whole bunch of them in once. You don't have to do so many. Maybe there are
Mm.
ingredients in there that we want to take out that are the main fact. Like let's just say aluminum is causing the problem. Maybe we take aluminum out. We put something else in that's safer. That could be possible, right? We've taken vaccines off the market and put safer ones on after they've caused issues. So like there's just no push to do that anymore
Right.
because nobody's forcing them to. Why would a company be like, well, yeah, let me spend $1 billion to do a research on my own product to find a problem to pull it off the market? Like they're not going to do it. So who's studying vaccine safety? Who's following kids once it's on the market? Who's doing that kind of research? Nobody is. That we just have passive systems like theirs that people can self-report if they have a problem. But how do you know something's related to a vaccine 5 years later? Like nobody's
Mm.
reporting that, so you don't know. That's the only way you can study that is by doing actual research.
Very interesting. And what is the reasoning on the hepatitis B vaccine for a 1-day-old baby? Is that recommended across the board, or is that only if the birthing parent has tested positive or
No, it's recommended across the board. So originally it was just originally the hepatitis B vaccine was put on the market for high risk population. So it was not for babies originally. So high risk. So you get it from sexual contact and blood. So mostly from promiscuous individuals or individuals who use drugs. That's who was given the vaccine first.
okay.
But there were still high rates of hepatitis B, and there still are in the world. So it's a real concern, and we still have thousands and low tens of thousands, like maybe 10, 20,000 cases a year of hepatitis B. So it's still around, it still occurs, but the rates of hepatitis B were still high that they were concerned enough. They said, well, we want to give it to everybody early because sometimes we'll miss a mom. Not every mom does test. So
Mm.
public health recommendation, we're going to recommend to everybody to get it. And as a public health measure, it work. I mean, the rates of hepatitis B have dropped dramatically from what they used to be. But I mean, the question now is, okay, but even though it worked, is it still not somewhat risky to give a 1-day-old baby a vaccine where they really almost have no risk of getting that disease now that we test parents?
Mm.
And I think that is an ethical and moral and uh, a reasonable discussion to be had, and it is being had now again, because w- while there is a risk theoretically to a baby, it's extraordinarily low if you have been tested. And I think that it's not unreasonable to explain to that parent, like, look, you have a 1 in a million chance of somebody walking by and bleeding on your baby, and they could still get hepatitis B, or maybe you have hepatitis B and the test was wrong and you didn't know, so a baby could get it. But realistically, like, those are your risks. And so, do you want to do hepatitis B now, or you want to do it later? And I don't think you couldn't do the hepatitis B later and cover most people. I think yes, there might be some situations where um, that baby maybe have gotten it and doesn't in that scenario, and that's the kind of ethical debate that you have to weigh because the question that is really implicit there or is okay, but what is the risk from the vaccine to a 1-day-old baby, right? Because yes, you
Mhm.
might be protecting more people from getting hepatitis B, but does the hepatitis B cause any problems, right? Because that changes
Right.
your risk calculation, right? If the hepatitis B vaccine causes zero problems for any baby, then yeah, you probably should just give it to every baby. Like, what's the issue? You're just giving them some water, like why not do it if you're protecting every baby? But that's not the reality of the world. The question is, what are the actual risks from that vaccine, short and long term? And even in the short term, we know that there's a risk of getting a fever from a vaccine. And if a baby
Mm.
gets a fever, they get a full workup in the hospital. So you're subjecting a whole bunch of babies who get a vaccine to potentially go to the hospital, get a lumbar puncture, be exposed to other things because they got a fever from a vaccine. So it's not
Mm.
totally benign, and that's just the short-term risks. So again, it's a weight calculation, and everyone's going to have different opinions on where you should go with that. But it's not an unreasonable question that you have. Do we need to give every baby a hepatitis B vaccine? It's not an extremely simple question, but you at least should be able to have that debate.
Do you have a lot of parents coming to your practice asking you how you approach vaccines with your own kids? And do you share with them? Do you not share? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, I don't usually share my kids' stuff because I think that I get asked it so much that, like, I know it's not fair to them, I think, to, like, just be talking about all their health stuff in the future so they can kinda keep that
Mm.
themselves. But, I mean, I always just approach it by what people do in the office, and we have a mix.
Mm.
And ultimately, what I do or what anybody else does is not relevant that parent. I mean, I think it's up to them to decide what makes sense for them. And what I did for my kids or what somebody else did isn't necessarily relevant for them or isn't what they should be doing. I think they have to think about the research and think about the information and think about their own situation and what they want to do. And in my office, we have people that do the regular schedule. We have people that do a slow schedule. Some don't do it. I would say the majority do some sort of slow schedule, but um, it's up to each person. They have to decide what risks they want because everything has a risk. And if you don't get a vaccine, you have a risk from the disease. And if you do get a vaccine, you have a risk from the vaccine. And you have to decide what you're more comfortable with. Are you comfortable from the risk of nature and getting a disease and potentially getting really sick, or are you comfortable with the risk from a vaccine and whatever kind of reaction you might have? And hopefully both of them are rare, but it's just not zero.
Right. During, all your research for this, were you surprised to learn how influential the pharmaceutical industry is on the healthcare system as a whole? Or were there any pieces of information that really surprised you that you hadn't known about?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that one of the things I was most surprised about was pharma, but I think it is really interesting and certainly surprising to realize just how influential they are. I don't think you think about it, and nobody really does. But the reality is they influence everything, right? They really influence all of what we've learned, and we just don't even think about it. Like they funded the medical schools, they funded the journals, they funded the news, they fund everything, they fund the politicians. So they're not doing it, I think, in a nefarious way. They're just
Right.
like, why do you fund everything? So that you curry some favor so that things go in your direction, right? That's what they do. And so you don't think like why shouldn't I trust pharma? Like I made the joke in the book. Doctors should be trained like why not trust pharma 101, right? Like that we should be trained in that, but there's no course on that, right? Like why should we trust what they're telling us? We should not trust what they're telling us and we should verify it ourselves because obviously a company would want to promote something that they're making. So I just don't think that we realize how much influence they have and how biased things are pushed in that direction. For
Right.
example, like the news. If the news is funded mostly by pharma, which it is, like 75%, then you're very unlikely or much less likely to, as a news station, say, oh, well, this product is causing a problem, or we're going to research this company. You're way less likely to investigate or say something negative about the people giving you all the money. It doesn't mean that you won't ever, but I mean,
Right.
realistically, that's just the way that it is. And with a politician, it's like, well, if they give you $1 million for your campaign, it doesn't mean that you're gonna like just approve their product because it's terrible, but you're gonna carry some favor with those people. They know you, they have your attention, they can get a hold of you easier. Yeah, oh, remember when I gave you that $1 million? Well, we have this bill coming in. Make sure you have a look at it. Like whatever it is, eh,
Right.
they're not just doing that like altruistically. They're not giving all their money to like feed kids in a third world country. They're buying all the things that have an influence, right? So they know what they're
Wow.
doing, and so yeah, I mean, again, it's not nefarious. It's just good work. It's just good PR. Like that's what you
Right.
should do if you have all that money. Is you want to keep that money and you want to make more money. So how do you do it? You make sure you influence all the areas you need to influence, and that's what they've done, and they've done it for decades. And so when you're a doctor and you go through med school and you learn about pharma, and most of your curriculum is here are the symptoms, here's how you treat it. I mean, that's intentional, right? It's not that a medication is bad. There are a lot of
Right.
medications that are great, but our curriculum is literally about pharmaceuticals. It's not about prevention. It's not about nutrition or diet or the things that don't need those because nobody's pushing that. Nobody's studying that. No, well, not nobody, but like it's not as funded obviously as pharma is. So
Right.
we don't think in those terms, but you have to get outside of it and be like, well, wait a minute, like why did I learn so much about pharma and very little about nutrition? That's because that's the way the med school's built, right? Not in
Yeah.
a nefarious way, just
Yeah.
like that's how it's built. So yes, it's influence because we were trained how to give you a pill.
So interesting. So basically, they have an influence on everything from the start of medical school and what you're learning to maybe what is said or not said in our media. I mean, like,
Or worse.
at every part of the process. So, I'm assuming this has, something to do with maybe the censorship around the vaccine discussion in general, how certain things get shut down immediately, or I don't know, this lack of open dialogue and public discourse about it.
That's what makes sense to me. That's my logical conclusion from all this over the last few decades is anyone that brings it up, then there's going to be a huge push from these companies to discredit that. And they have all the
Yeah,
money in the world to do it, so they can fund studies, they could push people, they could fund whatever, they could get you canceled, they could get your career ruined, they could stop funding you, whatever it is. for each different person that's come. But if you're doing research and a lot of research is dependent on pharma money, well, then they're not going to give me more money. So then your career's done. Or they're going to go, oh, look at this person spreading false information. Like they can't be at your hospital anymore. They can't be at your research center anymore. Like
Mm,
those are things that could be done. I'm not saying this happens every time or it's
right.
all again conspiracy theory, but I think that's the direction that things have gone. So there's a push over the last few decades to push back. And so I think that that's just a concerted effort that's been there, which would be there. Like, it doesn't mean that you're saying the right thing, but as soon as you say something that goes against a company, you're threatening their multi-billions, trillions of dollars. I mean, they're gonna do what they can to discredit you because that's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to say, no, 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 whatever you're saying about this vaccine, that's not true. Here's what's true. We have seen that over decades, and we don't realize it. We don't see it. But that they have full teams. They have full teams that work in Congress and full teams that work
Yeah.
in PR and marketing. They have all the money in the world, so they can do whatever they need to whenever they need to make you think whatever they want you to think. Only now are we starting to push back because of social media because they cannot control that. So they can control it
Oh,
to some
interesting.
degree, right? But
Yeah.
but and we saw. I mean, we saw it during COVID, right? I'm sure that they had a lot of push for taking down COVID misinformation, and I'm sure they were a big part of that push to make sure that their products look the best possible. So yes, I think they're involved in all that stuff as anybody would be who was a product. It's not like I don't think it's bad people. I'm sure there are some bad people, but mostly it's not bad people. It's just people doing their jobs. And
Right.
if your job is to market for Pfizer or whatever, like you're gonna do that. And if somebody says a bad thing about Pfizer, you're gonna say, okay, well, what could we do to show that this is wrong? Like that's your
Right.
job. I just don't think it's nefarious. I just think we have to realize the system we've set up,
Yeah.
and especially with vaccines, there's no easy way to push back, especially because you can't sue them. And ultimately, now is the first time that people are talking about it because they just there's no way to control social media and the censorship is gone for the first time ever. Like
Wow.
now is the first time we can have vaccine conversations, and I haven't in 6 months been censored talking about this, which I thought for sure I would. I thought when I was started working on my book, like I'm probably just get canceled, and but you just don't see the social media platforms really um, pulling down conversations about the word vaccine anymore. It's allowed to be up there.
Very interesting. And yeah, I'm so glad that you brought that up. I also agree that I think most people, they have good intentions. It just seems like there's a little bit of a monopoly going on. Something maybe needs to change systemically. I don't know. You mentioned nutrition. I'm just curious, how much nutrition training or education did you get in med school?
Yeah, very little too. I mean, it's the same thing.
Okay.
You learn a little bit about nutrition and then the macronutrients, and mostly you learn about diseases. So you learn about like deficiencies and things, but it's not a lot of training in what you should eat or having discussions about food. It's very minimal, almost
Yeah.
none. So again, it's like it's just not that's just not the training. Like the training is not about why sunlight's important or why you need to exercise. I mean, obviously you talk about it a little bit, but that's not the focus. And maybe it's like a day or a lecture, something like that when you're spending like 2 months on some other thing. It's just a very minimal kind of afterthought in med school, and so that's just something long term that needs to change, and there needs to be a lot more focus on prevention,
Mm.
but it just hasn't been done.
So
Hasn't
if
been.
you had an unlimited budget to, I guess, try to settle this vaccine debate once and for all, or even change the future of our healthcare system, what kind of things would you implement?
Number one, the first thing that I would do is really to diffuse the temperature, to really have long discussions on getting rid of mandates. I think the biggest concerns that most people have are they're gonna be forced to do something they don't want to do. And most people want to do vaccines and they do them and that's fine. But I think that once you start forcing people to do things they don't want to do, that creates a lot more issues and a lot more pushback. And that's what we saw with COVID, and that's what we're seeing now. And you're seeing the ultimate result of being forced to do something is the other end where a lot of people are just doing nothing and pushing back totally on vaccines. So I think that's something that would be
Mm,
really important to do is just to kind of really define when or if ever in the future you could mandate anything for a public health reason, and then really define that and make sure it's really short term and really for a very serious specific issue, if ever. And I think that's one key because I think people have a lot of nervousness around the fact that this happened, a couple years ago, and it could just happen again, and be forced to do another thing you don't want to do. So I think that's number one. And then number two would be to study them prospectively. I think you need a vaccinated versus unvaccinated trial, lots of them really. I mean, maybe 10 around the world, big trials, follow kids for 10 years. Um, you're not going to do a randomized study with that thing because this is really very difficult or maybe unethical to force people to get vaccines or to force people not to get vaccines. So it would be
Mm,
unblinded. You'd be able to choose which group you're in, but there are plenty of people that don't want to vaccinate that would be a part of a study like that. And follow kids forward, follow them for 10 years, and in 10 years we'd have a lot of information about um, the differences between the two groups, and we can use that information to kind of see where these assumptions are correct and incorrect, and really create information and more studies from there. But at least we'd have a lot more data, and that would be the strongest data you could have. So I think we need that.
right. So the comparison of vaccinated versus unvaccinated versus a placebo, like a long-term placebo trial, right? Because of the ethics involved in, somebody thinks they're getting vaccinated and they want that, but they're actually getting a placebo is not a great thing to do.
Right, you wouldn't be able to do that
Okay.
ethically,
Right.
in America for sure. So I think that that's not going to be a reasonable study to do or even to try to do. But there's no reason you can't let people choose,
Yeah.
and follow kids forward that they're getting. You can follow kids that are fully vaccinated on the regular schedule against kids that are partially vaccinated or going a slow schedule versus kids that get zero vaccines. And just you let people do whatever they want to do, but you just follow them forward. And if as long as you have enough kids that are unvaccinated, then you can see the differences overall. And obviously that it's not the perfect study because there still could be some other differences, but you're still going to get a reasonable understanding of the unvaccinated kid, how is their health versus kids that get vaccines.
Right.
And that would give you a really good picture of long-term conditions, and something that I think we need to have humility and say that we don't have the best vaccine program we're ever going to have in humanity. And I would hope in 10 years we'd have more information and could do better, safer things around
Right.
the vaccine topic. And that would be the way to do it.
And it seems like there'd be more than enough people willing to be part of that.
I don't think it'd be an issue at all. I think you'd have all the people that are anti-vaxxers running to go do it because they would be so happy to be able to show that vaccines are terrible in their mind, and you'd have plenty of people that are very pro-vaccine that are like, these are the best things ever, and we're going to show you that that doesn't matter. So I don't think
Right.
there's any problem getting volunteers. Obviously, the financing's the problem. So
Mm,
the question is who's going to do it and where, and who's going to follow it. And I think that's obviously the problem because those kind of studies cost billions of dollars. Like it's a lot of money to follow a big group of people for a long time.
and let's say that one of these studies happened and, the results, the findings were that maybe vaccines were not as, safe as once thought. How would this impact our society as a whole, the healthcare system? I mean, everything.
Yeah, well, I think one study wouldn't do anything, but I think if we or wouldn't do very much, but I think if you had multiple studies that were all showing the same thing, it would change the way that people practice. Because again, I go back to like doctors are not bad people; they want to do the right thing. And if you had
Right.
a bunch of long-term prospective trials run by people that were respectable, and not someone they would consider like an anti-vaxxer, but like a super pro-vaccine person, look at the data and be like, look, I thought that vaccines are not related to asthma, but we have 10 studies that show that it is. So then that would change the way we did things. I mean, it would change the way we did things. It would change the questions we asked, and the research would change. Doctors follow evidence. So
Mhm.
I think if you gave the health world the evidence that they were looking for, if it did show that, they would change what they were doing, and they would demand different things. Like they would demand that things were studied more. They would demand that the ingredients were changed. Whatever it is. I mean, it depends what was found. But
Mm,
I think that for sure things would change if that's what was
right.
found. And same thing, like if it was found that there were no problems in those studies, then that would change how people acted. More people would get vaccines.
Right.
It's just the reality. People would be less worried about them. They'd be like, well, yeah, okay, well, now you got the research that I wanted, and it didn't show any increase in autism. Great, like I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Right.
But that's never been done. So I think that the people that are screaming loudly about it are going to continue to scream until they get that done, and are not silenced.
Right. And do you think, let's say that the findings were, yeah, they're not as kind of safe as we thought. Do you think that the result would be kind of mass hysteria, mass lawsuits, that kind of stuff in the general public, or do you think that that's being created more now with the lack of information, the kind of hysteria going on?
I think this is a slow growing hysteria versus that would be a lot more sudden.
Mm,
I think that what you're getting at is real and would be a problem, but ultimately, if that's what needs to be done, it needs to be done. But yeah, I don't know what would happen if that was found because it would create a big problem in the short term, of a concern. And the other side of things, like you said, that's the other big problem with this again is you don't sue the companies, you sue the government, you sue a fund. And if, for example, autism was causally related to vaccines, there, how many lawsuits and how much money would that be?
Mm,
There isn't that much money.
right.
So that's a big problem. I mean, you would, but I think if something like that happened, they would just make different rules, different legislation. They would say like, well, you can't do X, Y, or Z. You can't. I don't know. Like it would have to be something where they would have to come along with that with some new rules because you couldn't just everybody sue. Um, so I
Right.
don't know. I don't know how that would roll out, but ultimately the goal should be healthy kids. So it shouldn't matter about lawsuits or whatnot. We should just do whatever's best for the kids.
Right.
And if that's what is found, then that's what's found. And if it's not found, it's not. But yeah, it would create some chaos because then you would have a lot of parents like, do I vaccinate? Do I not vaccinate? What do I do? I mean, we're already there, but it would be a lot worse if you like proved that vaccines cause X, Y, or Z. Then that would cause a lot more issues.
With the recent talks about Tylenol, are your patients asking you about that now as well? And do you have any thoughts on that that could be
Yeah,
helpful?
a little bit. I mean, I
Yeah.
think with autism and Tylenol, it's something that isn't new. This has been something that's studied for a long time. There has been a consistent trend with the research to show that there might be a small association. It's consistent. Not every single study shows it. Some studies don't show it. Some of the best studies don't show it, but a lot of good studies do. So I think that it's reasonable to inform people. I think it's reasonable to have some mild level of concern around Tylenol. I think you should always be respectful of all medication and you should only use it when you absolutely need it, especially during pregnancy. We have recommendations around ibuprofen and Motrin and
Mhm.
aspirin in pregnancy and many other medications. So I don't see why Tylenol shouldn't be any different, that it couldn't have caution around it. And we couldn't say, well, it's not definitively proven to cause autism, but maybe it's associated. So only use it if you really, really need to, but you should only be using it if you really, really need to anyways. I think that, the presentation of the way that it was discussed and presented was not the best. And some of it was a little bit hyperbolic and kind of over the top of what we actually do know and what we think about Tylenol. But I think ultimately discussions around autism are really important and looking into root cause is important. And I don't think we should be overstating what we know, but I think being like, well, I think the right thing would have been like, here we have some moderate association we're seeing. We're concerned about it. We're offering a warning. We're going to study it
Mm.
more. I think that's what really, that should have been the messaging. And so I think parents should, not just take Tylenol during pregnancy just because they have a little bit of pain, but I would have said that to you anyways. I think every medicine has a potential side effect and use it if you need to. And if you really need it, so be it. I mean, severe pain and an infection can also have its own issues. So I think you have to balance those two things.
The kind of confusion people are in right now about vaccines, can you compare it or relate it to any other point in American history where we were up in the air about something? Just, I don't know, maybe to kind of neutralize people a little bit to become more curious about it versus defensive.
Literally everything almost in medicine one time is proven wrong. Like you're told it's very definitive, and then later on we learn something else, or maybe that's not the full mechanism. So I think
Right.
there's a ton of precedent for that over the years, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to science or that we don't do whatever is best from our knowledge from today. But there is always and there have been many examples of things that we look back on and we're like, wow, that was pretty stupid that we did that. Like you said, like cigarettes were given as a treatment for things. Like that was like the thing you're supposed to do to decrease your anxiety. Doctors recommending it. We used to use mercury and arsenic as our medications, right? Like back in the day, and a lot
Right.
of people died from those things. So, right? I mean, like all these things you look back on and they're laughable now, but back then it was thought that that's what was helping. So, I
Mm,
think that there is a ton of precedent to be like, well, we think that vaccines are just so helpful and the best thing ever, and maybe in 100 years we're going to be like, what were we thinking? Injecting blah 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 10 times into our newborns. Like there are better ways to do it, and maybe that doesn't mean that we're not going to still try to protect against diseases, but maybe the mechanism that we're using isn't nearly the safest way to do that. And maybe if we tried to look into it more, we could find another way that had almost no risk versus whatever risk we do have. So yeah, yes, there's precedent. It doesn't mean that vaccines are bad or shouldn't be used, but I think that if we look back in history, all the things we thought were so good that turned out to not be, vaccines could be another one in that list where we put them up on a pedestal, and maybe they, while are still great and have had a lot of benefit over the years, maybe they're not as great as we think, or maybe not all of them are as great as we think, or maybe the schedule that we're doing is maybe there's just some part of it could be done differently, and that's just I think humility that we don't have a lot of in medicine right now. We just kind of have vaccines as a religion, and up on a pedestal. And I think that's a
Mm,
bad place to put them. I think they should be seen as every other medication and should be under the same scrutiny we have with every other medication. And vaccines are literally the one product in America that doesn't follow any of the regular rules. Like they just don't. I mean, we can't
wow.
sue those companies, and there's nothing else like that. I think we just have to recognize that.
Wow. Dr. Warsh, this was so fascinating. I learned so much today that I had no idea about. Is there anything that we didn't cover that could be really helpful for people to know, whether they're considering a vaccine for themselves or their children, and maybe where to direct people for your work and other resources that are helpful?
Yeah, I would just say, just to finish off, I mean, it's not woo-woo to have questions. I think it's okay to have questions, and we should all have questions, and you should be able to ask your doctor questions. And I think that's the main thing. We just need to be okay with it. We need to be able to have discussions. Nothing should be censored, and we should be able to talk about this. And you don't have to agree with everything. That's fine. But we should be able to talk about it. And I'm glad that you're willing to have this conversation. And I'm glad that more people are willing to have this conversation, and this stuff isn't getting censored, which is really good. Hopefully, my book is helpful. And Between a Shot and a Hard Place is what it's called. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it, where all books are sold, or the shopbook.com is the website. And you can find me at Dr. Joel Gator on Instagram or X, or also on Substack. We have a pretty good community there as well if you want to learn more. So there's a lot of different places where I put stuff out for, basically for free, or really trying to get that information out there, and try to have these discussions, because I think a lot of parents have these concerns, and that's why a lot of my
Right.
platforms have grown really quickly. Not because I'm saying some magic, but I think people just like having conversations.
Thanks for hanging out with Self-Helpless. Feel free to share this with someone who could use it, and you can binge related conversations linked in the show notes. Ad-free episodes are now available on Patreon, and because I'm practically allergic to social media, the best way to get notified about new episodes is to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or join the email list at selfhelplesspodcast.com, where you will also find some free goodies like a watch and read list and the quote buffet. All right, love you big time, and thank you so much.